The gravel crunched under the tires of the compliance officer's immaculate white sedan. A sound as alien and unwelcome in this quiet corner of the mountains as a siren. I was on my knees, carefully prying a rotted floorboard from the porch of my uncle's old house, a place that smelled of pine sap, damp earth, and 50 years of quiet solitude. My name is Trevor McClure. I'm an architect, and this dilapidated house, this forgotten half-acre of land, was my escape hatch from a world of concrete, steel, and endless client revisions. It was my legacy project, purchased with the bulk of my life savings to preserve the one place where my memories felt solid. The officer, a man named Henderson, according to his neatly laminated ID badge, stepped out of his car with the practiced ease of someone who delivers bad news for a living. He wore a polo shirt with a tasteful logo, a stylized green mountain peak, and the words Aspen Management Group embroidered beneath it. He held a tablet in one hand and a clipboard in the other. An arsenal of benign bureaucracy. "Mr. McClure," he asked, his voice pleasant, almost friendly. He didn't step onto the property, but stood precisely at the edge of the gravel drive, a careful observer of boundaries. "That's me," I said, rising slowly and wiping sawdust from my jeans. "Jim Henderson, Aspen Management. We're the managing agent for the Oak Creek Valley Estates Homeowners Association." He smiled a sterile, professional smile. "Just doing a routine community standards walkthrough. Welcome to the neighborhood. By the way, we hadn't seen any activity here for a while." I nodded, my mind already cataloging the interaction. Architect brain. Observe. Analyze. Anticipate. Thanks. Just getting started on the restoration. Henderson's eyes swept over the property, his gaze lingering on the overgrown native grasses I'd purposely left untouched, and the old, moss-covered stone post that marked the southeast corner of the lot. It was the original survey marker from the 1970s. A chunk of granite my uncle had always been stubbornly proud of. Henderson tapped a few notes onto his tablet. "Right. Well, that's actually what I'm here about," he said, his tone shifting from welcoming to informational. "We noticed a couple of minor items that will need to be brought into compliance with the community's governing documents." He handed me a glossy, tri-fold leaflet. It was a courtesy notice. The language was soft, couched in the language of neighborly cooperation, as part of our commitment to maintaining the aesthetic harmony and property values of Oak Creek Valley. It began. The notice listed 2 items. First, unauthorized structure boundary marker. Second, non-conforming landscaping overgrowth and unapproved flora. It cited CCNR, Sure 8.4.2. I looked from the leaflet to the ancient stone post, then back to Henderson. "You're telling me this survey marker, which has been here for 50 years, is an unauthorized structure. Anything not part of the original architectural plan or subsequently approved by the Architectural Control Committee would be considered as such?" "Yes," he recited, his eyes fixed on some point over my shoulder. "And the landscaping needs to conform to the approved palette of flora to maintain the view corridors. The full list is in the Community Design Guidelines, which we can provide." It was so absurd, so profoundly divorced from the reality of this rugged, untamed piece of land, that I almost laughed. This wasn't a manicured lawn in a cul-de-sac. It was a rustic homestead carved out of a mountainside. But I saw the unwavering placidity in Henderson's eyes. He wasn't here to debate. He was a messenger. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, keeping my voice even. "My property isn't part of any HOA." Henderson's smile didn't falter. "According to our community plat map, this parcel, Lot 114, falls within the association's jurisdiction. It's all in the documents you should have received at closing." He wasn't being aggressive. That was the most unnerving part. He was simply stating what he believed to be an incontrovertible fact, as if telling me the sky was blue. He took a few quick photos with his tablet of the house. The marker, the wild grasses, each click a small, sterile punctuation mark in the quiet mountain air. "This is just a courtesy notice," he said, already backing toward his car. "No fines or anything yet. It's just to get the conversation started. The notice has the contact information for the ACC. Just reach out to them within 10 days to discuss a remediation plan. Have a great day." He slid back into his sedan and drove away, leaving a faint cloud of dust that settled slowly back onto the gravel. I stood there, holding the glossy leaflet in my hand. It felt slick, alien. The polite, weaponized language of bureaucracy had arrived at my sanctuary. The hook was in. I felt a cold, clarifying focus settle over me. This wasn't about landscaping. It was about jurisdiction. And I knew, with the certainty of an architect reading a blueprint, that they were wrong. The house was more than just a project. It was a reliquary of my happiest memories. My Uncle Richard had been a geologist, a man who preferred the company of rocks and trees to people. He bought the land in the early 70s, long before the developers arrived with their vision of luxury mountain living. He built the house himself, with the help of a few friends, using timber milled from trees on the property. It was where I'd spent 6 summers as a kid, learning how to identify different types of granite, how to track deer, and how to find a profound sense of peace in absolute silence. When he passed away, the house fell into a state of legal limbo, tied up in a messy estate battle between distant relatives I'd never met. It sat vacant for over a decade until the county finally seized it for back taxes. The day I saw it listed on the county auction site, described as uninhabitable, my heart leaped. I saw past the rot and the decay to the solid bones Uncle Richard had built. I saw the massive stone fireplace, the hand-hewn ceiling beams, the wide porch where we'd sit and watch thunderstorms roll through the valley. Winning the auction felt like reclaiming a part of my own history. I liquidated a significant portion of my portfolio, the nest egg I'd been building for a down payment on a condo in the city, and poured it all into this. My plan was meticulous: restore the house using period-appropriate materials while subtly upgrading the infrastructure, new wiring, new plumbing, a geothermal heating system. It was my chance to build something for myself, not for a client, a legacy. The first thing I did after the deed was recorded was retrieve Uncle Richard's old files from storage, in a dusty box. I found the original plat map and the survey from 1972. I also found a framed easement deed, hand-signed, granting the county access to a small corner of the property for utility maintenance. I remembered him being immensely proud of that survey. A man's got to know his boundaries. Trevor, he'd told me, tapping the thick paper, on a map and in life. I had the survey professionally cleaned and framed it, along with the deed. They hung in my temporary rental down in town, a daily reminder of the history I was working to preserve. After Henderson's visit, I drove back to my rental and pulled out the thick binder of closing documents. Buried deep inside was a welcome packet from the Oak Creek Valley Estates HOA. My lawyer had flagged it during the title search, noting that while the HOA existed adjacent to my property, the title was clear of any covenants. My parcel, 72G in the county records, was explicitly excluded. The packet must have been sent in error by the title company, a piece of administrative boilerplate. I opened the packet. Inside were the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was a dense, 100-page document of legalese. I spent an hour reading through it, a highlighter in my hand. The rules were suffocatingly specific: approved paint colors, mandatory lawn maintenance schedules, restrictions on trash can visibility. the precise height and material for fences. Then, I found the section Henderson had referenced. Rate 4.2. Architectural harmony and view corridors. All lots within the community, whether developed or undeveloped, must be maintained in a manner that preserves the aesthetic harmony and protects the designated view corridors of the community as a whole. No structure, fixture, or landscaping element may be erected or maintained that, in the sole discretion of the Architectural Control Committee (ACC), detracts from this harmony. The ACC shall have the authority to require the removal or modification of any element deemed to be non-compliant. I highlighted the entire section. It was a masterpiece of subjective language, aesthetic harmony, sole discretion. It was a blank check for a committee to impose its will. It was the kind of vague, unenforceable clause that lawyers loved to dismantle. But it was also dangerous in the hands of someone who believed they had the authority to enforce it. I photocopied the page, along with my deed, my title insurance policy, and the certified county plat map showing my property line. I put them all in a neat folder. I would handle this the way I handled all professional disagreements, with clear documentation and calm, rational communication. I would simply prove they had made a clerical error. 10 days passed. I sent a polite, registered letter to the ACC with copies of my documents, explaining the situation and respectfully stating that my property was not under their jurisdiction. I received no reply. I continued my work on the house, the interaction with Henderson fading into the background noise of saws and hammers. Then the certified letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a mail carrier who needed my signature. The envelope was thick and bore the Aspen Management Group logo. It wasn't a friendly leaflet. This was a formal violation notice. The tone was no longer collaborative. It was cold, procedural, and absolute. Renotice of violation. Lot 114, Oak Creek Valley Estates. It cited the same two violations as before: the unapproved structure of the survey marker and the non-conforming landscaping. It referenced page 8.4.2 again, but this time it came with a threat. As per the association's governing documents, you are hereby granted a 14-day period to cure the aforementioned violations. Failure to bring the property into compliance by date, 14 days from now, will result in the levying of monetary fines, beginning at $100 per day, per violation. Furthermore, this notice serves to inform you that your initial letter and enclosed documents have been reviewed by the Board of Directors and found to be insufficient to challenge the association's jurisdiction as established by the amended Community Declaration filed in 2021. An amended declaration, a community plat map. This was the first I was hearing of it. They were claiming to have paperwork that superseded the official county records. The letter concluded by informing me that I had the right to a hearing before the ACC to plead my case. The paper felt heavy in my hand. The threat was no longer theoretical. It was official, dated, and delivered with the full force of a bureaucratic process designed to grind people down. My quiet restoration project had just become a legal battleground. I picked up the phone and called my site engineer. Jen, it's Trevor. Can you meet me for coffee? The HOA just declared war. On my way, she said. Without a moment's hesitation. Jen was fiercely loyal, but also relentlessly practical. Over coffee. She listened as I laid out the situation, spreading the documents across the small table. This is insane, she said, tapping the violation notice. They can't just draw a new map and claim your land. That's not how property law works. They seem to think it is, I said. They're citing an amended declaration from 2021. I need to find out what that is. And you need a lawyer, she added firmly. Not your usual contracts guy. You need someone who specializes in this kind of fight. Someone who bites back. The most galling part was their dismissal of my evidence, found to be insufficient. It was the language of absolute, unearned authority. They hadn't disproven my documents. They had simply declared them irrelevant. That evening, I emailed the ACC and formally requested the hearing. I was going to confront this head-on, armed with facts and the unwavering belief that the law was on my side. I was still naive enough to think that would be enough. The Architectural Control Committee hearing was not held in a community clubhouse or a sterile office. It was conducted via Zoom, a format that amplified the power imbalance. I was a single face in a small box on a screen. They were 5 faces, arranged in a neat row like a tribunal, with Karen Nolan, the HOA president, positioned in the center. She had the serene, unassailable confidence of someone who had never once had their credit card declined. Her backdrop was a tastefully blurred living room with a piece of abstract art visible over her shoulder. The other 4 members looked like acolytes, nodding in unison whenever she spoke. Mr. McClure. Thank you for joining us, Karen began, her voice smooth and polished. We are here to discuss the outstanding compliance issues at Lot 114. You have submitted documents which you believe exempt your property from the association's purview. Is that correct? That is correct, I said, holding up the certified county plat map to my laptop's camera. This is the official, recorded map for Summit County. As you can see, Parcel 72G is clearly outside the boundaries of Oak Creek Valley Estates. Karen didn't even glance at it. She gave a small, condescending smile. Yes, we've seen that. That is the old county map. It's outdated. The association, in partnership with the developer, filed an amended community declaration and an updated community overlay map in 2021 to incorporate several undeveloped parcels for the purpose of environmental stewardship and fire mitigation. Your lot was among them. She shared her screen. A digital map appeared, slick and modern, with clean lines and a professional-looking legend. My property was there, shaded a light green, and labeled OCV Environmental Preserve, Lot 114. It was a digital fiction, presented as fact. This is the governing map for our community, Karen stated flatly. It was prepared by a licensed surveyor and is on file with our management company. It supersedes any prior, outdated records. On file with your management company? Maybe, I countered, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to remain calm. But is it on file with the county recorder's office? Because I was there last week, and they have no record of any such amendment. For a boundary change like this to be legal, it requires public hearings and a formal vote by the county commissioners. Did that happen? A man on the committee, identified as Bob, cleared his throat. Our legal counsel has advised us that under the Planned Community Act, the association has the right to amend its own declarations to annex adjacent, undeveloped land for the good of the community. It was a gross misinterpretation of the law, a twisting of statutes to serve their purpose. I knew it, and I suspected they knew it too. They were banking on the fact that I wouldn't have the resources or the will to fight it. My land is not undeveloped, I said firmly. It has a residential structure on it, and I am the legal owner. You have no jurisdiction. Karen's smile tightened. The structure was listed as derelict and uninhabitable for over a decade. Mr. McClure, its inclusion was perfectly legal under the blight ordinance provisions in our declaration. We see no reason to reverse the committee's finding. You have 10 days to remove the non-compliant stone marker and submit a landscaping plan that conforms to the community design guidelines. If you fail to do so, Fines of $200 per day will commence. This hearing is adjourned. The screen went black. I was left staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. They hadn't just dismissed me. They had created their own parallel reality, complete with their own maps and their own laws, and were now punishing me for not living in it. The condescension, the sterile certainty of it all. It was breathtaking. The fight was no longer about a simple boundary dispute. It was about their fraudulent reality versus the actual, legally documented truth. Jen had been right. I needed a lawyer. And more than that, I needed an investigator. My first call was to a property law specialist Jen recommended. My second was to Ed Lane. Ed was a retired county surveyor, a cantankerous man in his late 70s who operated out of a cluttered office in his basement. The walls were covered in topographical maps, and the air smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. He looked at the HOA's updated community overlay map with a professional surveyor's contempt. GIS garbage, he grunted, peering at it through a magnifying glass. This isn't a survey. It's a graphic design project. See this? The lines are too clean. No reference to geodetic monuments, no bearings, no distances. It's a pretty picture they drew on top of a satellite image. He spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing the HOA's map with his own archival records and the official county GIS database. He pulled out dusty plat books and handwritten ledgers. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a grim smile on his face. It's worse than I thought. He said, this isn't just an error. It's a fabrication. They hired a disgraced former county planner to create this overlay, a guy who was let go for backdating permits. They found a loophole in the digital filing system and uploaded this amended map to a non-public-facing server, referencing it in their own internal documents as if it were official. It has no legal standing. It's the equivalent of scribbling on a napkin and calling it a deed. Ed agreed to prepare a sworn affidavit detailing his findings. He seemed personally offended by the sloppiness of the fraud. Amateurs. He muttered as I left. If you're going to commit fraud, at least have some respect for the craft. Armed with Ed's preliminary report, I felt a surge of confidence. But Jen, my ever-practical confidant, brought me back to earth. That's great, Trevor. But what's the end game here? An affidavit is good for court, but court takes months and costs a fortune. Is this fight going to cost more than the house is worth? It's not about the money anymore. Jen, I said, it's about the principle. They're trying to steal my land with paperwork. My next stop was the Oak Creek Valley community itself. I needed to know if I was the only one. I walked the pristine, uniform streets until I saw an older woman tending her rose bushes. Her name was Cheryl. She had lived there for 30 years, long before Aspen Management and Karen Nolan's reign began. When I mentioned the HOA, her posture stiffened. Be careful, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if spies were lurking in the perfectly trimmed hedges. Karen Nolan. She has eyes everywhere. I explained my situation. Cheryl listened intently, her expression a mixture of fear and recognition. They're getting bolder, she murmured. A few years ago, it was just notices about the color of your mailbox. Now, this. She hesitated, then made a decision. Come inside. In her quiet, tidy living room, she pulled a small box from a closet. It was filled with years of HOA correspondence. She handed me a stack of papers bound with a rubber band. These are the board meeting minutes from the last 2 years, she said, or what they give us. Anyway. I flipped through them. Entire sections were blacked out with a thick marker. Paragraphs under headings like parcel adjudication and legal counsel review were completely redacted. What's under there? I asked. We don't know, Cheryl said, her voice barely audible. They say it's to protect the association's legal interests. I think it's to protect themselves. She pointed to a date. This is the meeting where they supposedly approved the community expansion. But the vote tally, the discussion, it's all blacked out. This was the first piece of internal evidence. The redactions were a confession in themselves. They were hiding something. As I was about to leave, Cheryl touched my arm. "There's one more thing you should know about Karen Nolan," she said quietly. "It's not just about control for her. It's personal. Her father tried to buy up all this land back in the 90s. Wanted to build a private golf course. Your uncle was the one who stopped him. Richard McClure. He organized the local landowners. Went to the county commission. It got ugly. Humiliated her father publicly. She's never forgotten that." Cheryl's revelation landed like a lead weight in my stomach. This wasn't a random bureaucratic overreach. This was a vendetta. Decades in the making. Karen Nolan wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to finish a family feud. To erase the legacy of the man who had defeated her father by annexing his land and bulldozing his memory. My fight to restore my uncle's house was a direct challenge to her quest for retroactive victory. The knowledge was chilling, but it was also clarifying. I now understood the ferocity of her attack. It explained why she wasn't backing down, even when presented with evidence that she was in the wrong. Her goal wasn't compliance. It was conquest. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen, was thrilled. A personal vendetta establishes motive and intent. She said during our next meeting, "This moves it from a simple property dispute into the realm of malicious prosecution and abuse of process. This is good for us." But Karen was already escalating. The 10-day grace period from the Zoom hearing expired, and the fines began. I received a formal notice of fine in the mail, $100 per day for the survey marker and $100 per day for the landscaping. Retroactive to the date of the hearing. The bill was already over $2,000. Then the whisper campaign started. Anonymous posts began appearing on the Oak Creek Valley community's private Nextdoor forum. I knew because Cheryl sent me screenshots. "Does anyone know what's going on with the derelict property at the end of the North Trail? I heard some hostile developer from the city bought it and is refusing to follow any of our community rules. This is how property values start to decline." Another post was more direct. Warning. Be careful around Lot 114. The new owner was seen acting aggressively toward management staff. Let's keep our community safe and welcoming. They were painting me as a hostile outsider, a threat to their manicured paradise. It was a classic tactic: isolate the target, turn their neighbors against them, and increase the social pressure to comply. I felt a knot of anger and anxiety tighten in my chest. This was exactly the kind of public confrontation I had moved to the mountains to escape. The final blow of the week came in a long, white envelope. Not from the HOA, but from my own homeowner's insurance company. Dear Mr. McClure, we have received an anonymous report regarding potential liability risks at your insured property. The report alleges unpermitted structures and hazardous overgrowth that may increase the risk of wildfire. Please provide documentation within 30 days to verify that the property is in full compliance with all local ordinances and covenants. Karen, or someone acting on her behalf, had reported me to my own insurance carrier. It was a brilliant, vicious move. If my insurance was canceled, my mortgage would be in default. The pressure was now coming from all sides: legal, financial, and social. I sat on the porch of my uncle's house, the pile of threatening letters on the table beside me. The mountain air felt heavy. For the first time, Jen's question echoed in my mind. Is this fight worth it? I looked at the old stone survey marker, the one that had started it all. My uncle had put it there. It was his line in the sand. And now, it was mine. The answer was yes. It was worth it. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah. They're trying to squeeze me out. Sarah, it's time to stop defending and start attacking. File the countersuit. And subpoena everything, their financials, their full, unredacted board minutes, and every piece of correspondence Karen Nolan has sent for the past 5 years. He would simply present the facts, in order, without commentary. He had learned that the most devastating weapon against this kind of person was calm, meticulous truth. 2 weeks later, the most dreaded document of all arrived via courier, a notice of intent to file a lien. This was the HOA's ultimate weapon. For a few $1,000s in unpaid, illegitimate fines, they were threatening to place a legal encumbrance on my property. A lien would cloud my title, make it impossible to sell or refinance, and, if left unpaid, could eventually lead to foreclosure proceedings. It wasn't an instant lien. It was a formal notice that they would file one if the debt wasn't paid within 30 days. The threat, however, was just as potent. The pressure was immense. My nights were sleepless, filled with scenarios of losing everything I had poured into this house. But with each new threat, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. The sheer audacity of their campaign was galvanizing. I spent my days at the county records office, my evenings on the phone with Sarah, and my nights hunched over my laptop, organizing files. My evidence packet was growing into a formidable archive of their corruption. It included 1. Ed Lane's sworn affidavit, now expanded into a 20-page report that systematically dismantled their fraudulent map. 2. Certified copies of every official plat map for the area dating back to 1970. 3. A timeline of every interaction, documented with certified mail receipts and time-stamped photos. 4. The screenshots from the Nextdoor forum, proving the smear campaign. 5. A copy of the query from my insurance company. But the final, critical piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. An anonymous email appeared in my inbox. The address was a random string of letters and numbers. The message was short. You've been asking for the unredacted minutes. Karen Nolan keeps the real set on a private server. Not with Aspen Management. She acted against legal advice. Look for the board meeting dated October 17, 2021. They knew they had no jurisdiction. Attached was a PDF. It was the unredacted version of the minutes Cheryl had given me. I scrolled down to the blacked-out sections under parcel adjudication. The text was there, in plain black and white. Legal counsel advises against the annexation of Parcel 72G McClure. The parcel's pre-existing residential status and clear title exclusion from the original declaration present a significant legal risk. Counsel recommends abandoning this course of action. K. Nolan overruled counsel's advice, stating the risk was manageable, and instructed the board to proceed with the amended overlay map under her executive authority. This was the smoking gun. Karen had been explicitly warned by her own lawyers that what she was doing was illegal, and she did it anyway. She had acted unilaterally. But as I read further, my stomach dropped. In a separate, seemingly unrelated section of the minutes, I found another note. Resident request from C. Miller Lot 42 for fence variance was discussed. K. Nolan granted an informal administrative approval for the non-compliant cedar fence, citing the resident's long-standing good standing in the community. C. Miller. Cheryl. Her fence, the one behind her beautiful rose bushes, was technically in violation of the HOA's height and material restrictions. Karen had let it slide, likely as a way to keep a longtime resident quiet and compliant. If I used these unredacted minutes to expose Karen, I would also be exposing Cheryl. Her informal, off-the-books approval would vanish, and she would immediately be in violation, vulnerable to the very same selective enforcement I was fighting. I now faced a profound moral dilemma. My most powerful piece of evidence came at a cost: the safety of the one neighbor who had been brave enough to help me. The annual HOA meeting was a week away. Sarah had confirmed I was on the schedule for the open forum. I had exactly 5 minutes. A large digital clock would be counting down beside the podium. That was the stage where this would all end. I had to decide what I was going to do. The community clubhouse was a sterile, beige room that smelled of weak coffee and quiet desperation. About 60 residents were scattered among the rows of folding chairs, their expressions ranging from bored to resentful. At the front of the room, on a raised dais, sat the board of directors. Karen Nolan was in the center, flanked by her 4 loyalists. She looked composed, regal, projecting an aura of complete control. Next to the podium, a large digital display showed 5s out of 0. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I arranged my files on the lectern. I had spent the last 48 hours wrestling with my conscience and redesigning my presentation. I had found a different way, a better way. "Good evening," the acting secretary droned. "Next on the open forum agenda is Mr. Trevor McClure, Lot 114. I walked to the podium. A low murmur went through the crowd. I was the hostile outsider, the villain from the next-door posts. I could feel their eyes on me. I looked directly at Karen. Her expression was a mask of polite indifference. I pressed the button to start my timer. The numbers on the screen began to descend. 4, 59, 4, 58. "Good evening. My name is Trevor McClure. For the past 6 weeks, your board of directors, led by Miss Nolan, has been engaged in a campaign of harassment against me, based on the false premise that my legally owned property is under the jurisdiction of this association. They have done so using fraudulent documents, misrepresentations of the law, and a pattern of intimidation. I am here tonight not to argue, but to present facts." I projected my first image onto the screen behind the board, a collage of the certified mail receipts, violation notices, and the lien warning. 4:30. Exhibit A pattern of harassment. This campaign began with a courtesy notice and has escalated to a threat of foreclosure, all based on a claim that has no legal merit. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the official, certified Summit County plat map, side by side with the HOA's slick, self-produced community overlay. 355. Exhibit B, the fraudulent map. On the left is the legal reality, recorded and certified by the county. On the right is a fiction, created by this board to unlawfully annex my property. It has never been recorded by the county and has no legal authority. Next slide. A picture of Ed Lane's stern face next to a summary of his credentials and the cover of his sworn affidavit. 310. Exhibit C expert testimony. This is the sworn affidavit of Ed Lane, a county surveyor with 50 years of experience. He concludes, under penalty of perjury, that the association's map is a deliberate fabrication designed to unlawfully assert jurisdiction. Karen's composure was beginning to crack. A faint flush was creeping up her neck. Her fellow board members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Now came the critical moment. I looked out into the audience, and my eyes met Cheryl's. She looked terrified. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. The central question. I continued, my voice calm and steady, is how this was allowed to happen. An association's board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of all its members. and to act based on sound legal advice. But this board did not. I did not put the unredacted minutes on the screen. I had made my choice. Instead, I projected my final piece of evidence, which I had received from my anonymous source just last night. It was a different document, an internal email chain. 205. The email was from Karen Nolan to Jim Henderson at Aspen Management. Dated the day after I had sent my first registered letter with my deed and plat map. It read, Jim, we've received the documents from the owner of 72G. Our legal counsel is advising we stand down, but I am instructing you to proceed with the formal violation process. We will not be deterred by outdated paperwork. The integrity of our community plan is paramount. This email proved everything I needed to prove that Karen had been aware of the legal questions, that she had willfully ignored them, and that she had acted unilaterally, without a formal board vote recorded in any minutes, redacted or otherwise. And it did so without ever mentioning Cheryl's fence. This email, I said, letting the words hang in the silent room, proves that Ms. Nolan was aware of the legal risks and chose to proceed anyway. Against advice. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate choice. A choice that has exposed this association to massive legal and financial liability. My countersuit, which was filed last week, names not only the HOA, but Ms. Nolan personally for abuse of process. The clock showed 1:10. I had made my case, but I wasn't finished. This isn't just about my property. It's about your property. It's about a board that believes it can operate above the law, create its own maps, and ignore legal counsel, all while using your dues to fund their personal vendettas. The question for all of you is this the kind of leadership you want for your community? I let that question settle as the timer ticked down. 0, 30, 0, 29. I gathered my papers. The room was utterly silent. No one was looking at me anymore. Every eye in the room was fixed on Karen Nolan. Her mask of composure had shattered. 003, 002, 001, 000. My time was up. I walked back to my seat. In the stunned silence that followed, a man I recognized as one of the board members, the one named Bob, who had spoken at the Zoom hearing, slowly raised his hand. His face was pale. I would like to make a motion, he stammered, his voice shaky. I move for an immediate freeze on all enforcement actions, fines, and lien proceedings against Lot 114, pending a full, independent audit of the Architectural Control Committee and a third-party review of our governing documents and community maps. Another board member immediately seconded the motion. Karen tried to interject, to call the motion out of order, but her authority had vanished. The sound of her voice was swallowed by the rising murmur of the homeowners. A resident in the front row stood up. I have a question for the board. How much of our money has been spent on legal fees for this vendetta? Another person shouted from the back. Were we ever told that the board was acting against legal advice? Did the rest of the board even know about that email? The questions came like a flood, pointed and angry. The residents, who had been cowed into compliance for years, were finally finding their voice. They weren't looking at me as an outsider anymore. They were looking at me as the person who had shown them the crack in the facade. Karen Nolan sat frozen, her face a mixture of shock and fury. She tried to bang her gavel, but the sound was lost in the chaos. The meeting devolved as Bob, the board member who made the motion, called for an immediate vote. It passed overwhelmingly. Karen's power had crumbled in less than 5 minutes, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating weight of documented truth. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The independent audit revealed years of financial mismanagement and procedural abuses under Karen's leadership. Aspen Management Group's contract was terminated. Karen Nolan was removed from the board in a special recall election, a move she fought and lost spectacularly. The lien against my property was formally voided. All fines were expunged, and the HOA's lawsuit against me was withdrawn with prejudice. My countersuit was settled out of court. The HOA's insurance carrier, eager to avoid a public trial, paid a substantial sum to cover my legal fees and damages. At the first meeting of the newly elected board, I stood up during the open forum, not as an adversary, but as a member of the wider community. I proposed a transparency and boundary affirmation bylaw, which would require any changes to the community's jurisdictional boundaries to be approved by a supermajority of homeowners and ratified by the county. It passed unanimously. A week after the settlement check cleared, I received one final email from the anonymous address. The sender finally revealed themselves. Good work. Mr. McClure, my name is David Chen. I was the junior account manager at Aspen Management, assigned to the Oak Creek Valley portfolio. I was fired after I raised concerns with my superiors about Ms. Nolan's directives regarding your property. I couldn't go public for fear of being blackballed in the industry, but I couldn't let them get away with it. I thought you should have this. It might explain Ms. Nolan's desperation. The attachment was a series of emails between Karen Nolan and a luxury property developer. The developer was offering Karen a substantial kickback for the successful acquisition of parcels suitable for high-density cabin development. My uncle's property, with its prime location and scenic views, was at the top of their list. Her vendetta wasn't just personal, it was profitable. Her plan was to use the HOA's power to seize my land through foreclosure on fabricated fines, then sell it to her developer friend. I forwarded the entire email chain to the county's district attorney. The civil matter was over, but the criminal investigation was just beginning. That evening, I sat on my newly finished porch, a beer in my hand, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool and crisp. The only sounds were the wind in the pines and the distant call of a hawk. The old stone survey marker stood at the corner of my property, solid and immovable. It was more than just a boundary post now. It was a monument to a quiet, principled stand. The house was finally, truly, and peacefully mine.